Netflix show caused a real-life murder, and the details are way darker than you think. So it all started in the 2010s when the CEO of a Chinese video game company named Lin Ke decided that he wanted to make a movie based on his favorite book, the Chinese sci-fi novel The Three-Body Problem. Lin Ke's company Yuzu Interactive was flush with cash at the time because they produced mobile apps that were basically cheap loot box games featuring large-chested women. So he just bought the rights to the book outright. But instead of hiring a director and a writer to make the movie like he would normally do, instead he assembled a board within his company to kind of synergy the movie into life. The head of this team within the company was a man named Zhu Yao, and they spent years developing this movie, writing different scripts, choosing cameras, shooting test footage, coming up with different scenarios for how the story would be told. Years of development without ever actually making a real movie or even getting close to making a real movie. Cut to years later, and I mean years later, in 2020, Lin Ke gets fed up with the lack of progress on this project, so he unceremoniously removes Zhu Yao as the head of it and demotes him to a much lower position in the company. And this is totally humiliating for Zhu Yao because he does it in front of everybody and he blames him publicly for years of lost time and millions of wasted dollars, and he puts him in this demeaning lower position. And Lin Ke basically realizes that maybe his video game company can't actually develop a multi-billion-dollar sci-fi franchise on their own, and he starts talking to Netflix about developing it into a movie or series, and they hire D.B. Weiss and David Benioff, the showrunners from Game of Thrones. So now Three Body Problem is in development at a real film studio with actual showrunners, and Lin Ke and Yuzu Entertainment are just executive producing it. But then shortly after that, later in 2020, something starts happening. Lin Ke gets really sick. He falls violently ill, he gets put into the hospital, and eventually he dies. And it's very quickly discovered that the reason for this is because he was poisoned. And it doesn't take long for the police to put two and two together and realize that the person who poisoned him was Zhu Yao, who was working at the company essentially as this low-level employee who was bringing Lin Ke his tea every day and slowly poisoning him. As a matter of fact, the police already suspected that he had been poisoned before he died and were actively trying to figure out what poison it was so they could get an antidote and save his life. And they already suspected that Zhu Yao was the culprit, but they questioned him and he refused to tell them what poison he used, specifically because he wanted to ensure that Lin Ke died. So Zhu Yao was put in prison, and in March of 2024, Three Body Problem premiered on Netflix, and Lin Ke got a posthumous executive producer credit on the show. However, there was a separate Three Body Problem show that was produced after this by Tencent, another massive video game company who licensed the rights from Yuzu Interactive and made a Chinese version, which a lot of people say is way better than the Netflix show. So I guess treat your employees better?